Ladies and gentlemen, guests of honor, a very good afternoon to everyone who join us at Penang Institute in this lovely afternoon, as well as our participants from the virtual platform. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together to welcome our guest of honor, Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud, Executive Director and Professor of Global Health from Sunway Center for Planetary Health, Sunway University. Salam sejahtera and salam sehat Malaysia. Yang berbahagia, Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud, Executive Director and Professor of Global Health Sunway Center for Planetary Health, Sunway University. Yang berbahagia, Datuk Sri Dr. Anwar Fazal, President, the Dr. Lien-Teh Society. Yang berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Ooi Kee Beng, Executive Director of Penang Institute. Datuk, Datin, members of media, ladies and gentlemen, both in this hall and those joining us virtually from the online platform. On behalf of the organizer, we wish to extend our very warm welcome to your attendance to today's 7th Dr. Lien-Teh Annual Public Lecture and the 2nd award ceremony for the Dr. Lien-Teh Award for Leadership in Public Health 2023. I am Ho Chi Peng, or known as Peng, Secretary General of the Dr. Lien-Teh Society, your MC and moderator for the day. Today's event is held in conjunction to commemorate the 144th birthday anniversary of Dr. Wu, which fall on 10th of March, and to celebrate his legacy with everyone here. It is also part of the serial event of the 10 years anniversary of the Dr. Lien-Teh Society. Without further ado, let's put our hands together to invite Yang Berbahagia, Datuk Dr. Ooi Kee Beng, Executive Director of Penang Institute, for his welcoming speech.
Thank you, Peng. I was taller last week. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Penang Institute. We are proud to again be the venue for the Dr. Lien-Teh Award annual public lecture, the 7th in the series, I think, and for the presentation of the Dr. Lien-Teh Award for Leadership in Public Health. When we met last year, it felt to me like the pandemic was beginning to end. Now it does feel like this year, it does feel like we are at the end of the pandemic. That is good news indeed. And we are furthermore very happy to have with us today Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud, someone who has had a very long experience managing crisis in health, in disasters, and in conflict settings. Managing crisis in health, in disasters, and in conflict settings. Reading that, I have to say that hers is a career with very good future prospects. Yeah. We all expect more pandemics, more disasters, more conflicts ahead. And we will need people like her to be there to mitigate the effects of these adversities. But what Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud seems so deeply immersed in are all at the nexus between health, the environment, and governance. These are indeed all issues that engage us nowadays at every level. And I'm sure it is not really possible to separate these matters fully anyway. I, for one, therefore look forward to listening to Professor Jamila speak about our health, our planet's health, and how we seem bent on accelerating our own extinction. I remember that in the years before COVID-19, even in Little Penang, we felt we should each do something about our immediate surroundings. We should limit single-use plastics. We should manage our waste better. We should aim for a circular economy, and so on and so forth. After COVID-19, and with the Ukraine war set to have global security consequences, and given that two of the three largest economic poles in the world, the one set in the Atlantic and the other set in the Pacific, can no longer get along and are doing zero-sum calculations, our sense of effective agency at this very local level has certainly dropped. And I'm sure that Professor Jamila's lecture will encourage us to be more optimistic and proactive again. I look very much forward to hearing it. Once again, welcome everybody to Penang Institute. I now hand over the floor to Dr. Lien-Teh Society, to Dato Sri Anwar Fazal.
Thank you very much, Dato, for a warm welcoming. We would like to invite none others but our beloved president of the Dr. Lien-Teh Society, Dato Sri Dr. Anwar Fazal, to give his officiating speech today. The floor is yours, Dato Sri.
Thank you, Dr. Peng. I was just telling Professor Jamila that I'm a member of the International Network Against the Proliferation of Salutations. And next to being number one in Malaysia in food waste, we're also number one in the list of salutations that you have to make. And that's I could not find any other country that has got such a culture that salutations are made that are that long, and not only so, but sometimes even repeated 7 times, depending on the kind of conference you have. So I'll just say, citizens of the universe. Yeah, I think that's what we all are, and I think it relates to the topic that we all have a oneness, and that we share something. Countries just divide us, and they're all artificial, and they're created and so on. But we think of one universe on which we are, more than the even the planet. We think of ourselves as children of Mother Earth. And when you think of it as children of Mother Earth, you begin to relate that you are part of the ecosystem, and it's not they against us. It's we, our family, our community extends to Mother Earth, and then you think of it differently every time you see it. And I say brothers and sisters, and I use that because I think, again, we are all brothers and sisters and linked with each other. Today we are celebrating a very special person from Penang, Dr. Lien-Teh. And Lien-Teh was many things. People know him for his health work, the mask, his scholarliness, but he was more than that. Yeah? He was, when he came here from Cambridge, he was a number 1 student. When he came here, cannot be a doctor. Only Europeans can be doctors. He has to be a medical assistant. That was the kind. Penang Hill, the railway, Europeans only, others. With that. So he started the anti-racism society in the place. So here was someone involved in health, but his concept of health was just health of the community, health of the world, and fairness and equality, equity became the fundamentals of his life. And this anti-racism society made an impact, and things did change. Then because he had come from UK, and opium was one of those big industrial businesses, and Penang had the distinction of having more than half its revenue coming from franchises on opium. Isn't that amazing? So it will be beneficial for the state government. The more addicts you have to opium, the more business there will be, and the more money the state government will get. Wow, isn't that a very successful business? Yeah? And they give franchises to people who will then pay huge sums of money to the state and do anything that the government wants, because they will ring the pub up. Hey, Mr. Chia, I'm using Chia deliberately, not because of you, because there was a Mr. Chia who was once the superintendent of opium in Penang. So he was a person who was given the franchise. But isn't it interesting that they give the person the franchise and he's supposed to control it? And the opium office was in the Star Building, in Pitt Street. Very interesting place. And he's called the superintendent, So it gives to him a certain legitimacy. And not just legitimacy, also like an authority, because a superintendent is someone who organizes things. One time they call him and say, hey, Mr. Chia, Diamond Jubilee, Queen Elizabeth, We want to build a tower, can you pay for it? He'll say, how much? 40,000. 40,000. Okay. And then we put your name, there. And so all of you know about the clock tower, Victoria Clock Tower that is near the garden. So that was financed, by one of the opium kings in there. But the design, interestingly, was organized by competition. And there was an engineer, a European engineer here, who designed the building. And very few people know that it actually represents 4 civilizations. 4 civilizations. The top one is Islamic civilization, because you see the minaret on top. After that, people think the rest of the thing is just like that. The second civilization, you look at the architecture, is Indian architecture. And the third, you look at it carefully, it's got a balcony. You think you are in Italy or, everywhere where you have the beautiful art, of that. And that's the European architecture. And at the bottom, you have a nice design there, including 4 lions taking water out of their mouths. And you know which civilization that will be. That was the Chinese part. No? And the Chinese one, the lowest, the biggest, the strongest. Like in a way, in fact, the Chinese community likes like the foundation of that. But the most visible, most respectful was the Islam one. They give them the minaret. And it's very interesting how it was worked out. But this opium business was so big that he said in England, opium has already been banned. In Penang, it's celebrated, It's celebrated, And so he started that, And he bought over a clinic from an English doctor. The English government, the colonial government, and the opium taukes were, of course, very angry with him, because he was calling for this end of the opium thing. What did they do? They took the authorities to go to his clinic in Cholia Street, or the other one, I can't remember, that Cholia Street, which was before a European woman was running it. They asked him to open his cabinet where he keeps the legal medicines, legal medicines that are important, the restricted ones or whatever. And he opened it, and there they said, you got opium. But this opium, you don't have license from the government. So they charged him, took him to court, and fined him a big amount. So you can see how vicious and how ruthless they were. So this was a person who fought on big things and got captured, fined for doing good things, and then released. And he was like that, suffering to every, so he's organizing every campaign. And then, of course, he got a letter from China, because in China they were having a plague that was identified wrongly and not being controlled. There was, Alex might know, is from Germany, it's a German doctor there. He diagnosed it as bubonic plague. Yeah. But actually, he said it's a pneumonic plague. It's given by the air, And so he took that and he really made amazing amount of difference. They would not allow the bodies to be cremated, because burial on ground was the standard. To burn a body is like sending the body to hell, Send hell. So could not. But he wrote a letter to the emperor, personally, and said that if you don't allow me, all the bodies that have been infected, to burn them, the flies and everybody who touches them in the ground, the ants, they will continue to spread the thing. Yeah? And the emperor gave dispensation, and he burned the bodies, and with that, and then he asked everybody, you must cover yourself because it's pneumonic, right? That thing all disappeared. It's just an amazing story. Now, cremation is normal. Interesting how a huge transformation in China was due also to Dr. Lien-Teh. And so this legend that actually did amazing things for that. We have his books here. We also have, there are some other books that he did, including on traditional Chinese medicine. He also set up the Chinese Medical Association, which now has 500,000 members. He started the first modern medical schools medical hospitals, and then got associated also with the university. He set up the Chinese Medical Association. So you had a person who was also transformational for a whole nation. Then, after spending nearly 30 odd years here, Japanese invasion, and then he had finished most of his work, and his wife had died there, and I think even his children once died there. So I think I come back home. But he did not want to come back to the colonial government here, 1935. Because he knew if he came here, these were the enemies, that did not like what he went. So he decided to go to Ipoh. And had a clinic there, wrote biography, and that's another special story. So here is a person that really was in a way a rebel, a person. He was very small, yeah. You can compare him to Napoleon and so on. Some of the great leaders were all quite small. It shows you how small guys can really be quite tough and get things done. Today we are also celebrating another legend for Malaysia, a person who's been remarkable and put Malaysia on the world map in terms of humanitarian work, where we had one of the best organizations that went places in the world wherever there were emergencies. And hardly any third world country would even have the concept of doing this kind of work, with a wonderful title of mercy, a word that is in Islam and in all the religions such a special word, that you should do the word mercy. That it's like compassion. It's like that. And her story of building that up, helping the United Nations to build that up, building up a center in now being associated with another center, and taking the whole idea of health, of humanity, into a bigger plane at looking at how we are taking care of the whole world. Because very often, these disasters, we blame the wrong people. We are our own enemy with regard to the way we treat our environment. And instead of thinking of it as part of our reality, part of our commonness, we forget. And so it's moved on into the area of planetary health. We begin to look at all the things that are connected and interconnected with us. So it will be a very special lecture, very unique in a way, because it takes us and even the society for the first time, the whole issue of the bigness of the health problem and the period when now we are not just a crisis, we are actually in an emergency state in terms of where we are in society. So enjoy, listen, because the Chinese word ting, it's got 3 characters. One character is the ear, the other character is the eye, and the third character is the heart. So listen to Tan Sri, the ting way, with your ears, with your eyes, and with your heart. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dato' Sri. Kindly be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Lien-Teh was a highly respected public health physician and an internationally acclaimed plague fighter more than 100 years ago. His unyielding passion for humanity and social justice extended beyond his role as a doctor. His extraordinary life story and heroic achievements have remained an inspiration and set the standard for generations to come. The Society established the Dr. Lien-Teh Award for Leadership in Public Health in 2022, last year, to recognize the exemplary leaders and their outstanding contributions to the field of public health. Their passion and determination in making a difference for humanity, their fighting spirit is infectious, and their achievements continue to inspire many others. We invite the awardee to deliver the NIM Annual Public Lecture every year. This year, it is our great honor to have Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud as our second recipient for this award. in recognition of her prominent leadership as a trusted humanitarian and founder of Mercy Malaysia, with remarkable contributions to the development of humanitarian and international emergency aid at home and globally. She pioneered the use of Islamic social finance to address humanitarian crises. Her active engagement in interagency partnership, resource development and mobilization, strategic planning, policy implementation, and global communication have inspired many and made a great impact with positive changes. She actively advises on environment, social, and governance in advisory and board roles she holds. Her strong advocacy for planetary health and sustainable development is remarkable. Without further ado, we would like to invite Dato Sri Dr. Anwar Fazal, in companion by Dato Dr. Uiki Beng, to present the second Dr. Lien-Teh Award for Leadership in Public Health to Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud. We will invite them to come on stage. Please remain on stage. Please allow us to have a moment to invite our committee member of the Dr. Lien-Teh Society to come forward to have a group photo. After that, we will have a photo with audience on the floor. Can we have all the committee members? Yeah.
Okay, just leave it.
And we do have a scroll. The scroll.
You have to say hello.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you very much for your time. That was okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
I over here, I saw me, ready, 1, 2, 3, one more time, 1, 2, 3, one more, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you very much, everyone. Nancy and Dr. Sri, please be seated. We will take a group photo from the stage to the floor. Please.
That's okay.
Please be seated. Eyes on me again. Steady. Steady. Mr. Chair, I cannot see you. You have to move here. All right, one more. 1, 2, 3. Hi, everyone. Freestyle? No style? Cheers. Okay, done.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for the participant from our virtual platform being patient with us while we have photo here. Now, we would like to proceed to our 7th Dr. Lien-Teh Annual Public Lecture by Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud. Kindly allow me to introduce herself. Dr. Mahmud is a medical professional with more than 2 decades of experience managing crises in health disaster and conflict setting. She is currently the professor and executive director of the newly established Sunway Center for Planetary Health at Sunway University in Malaysia. She is a member of the Malaysian Climate Action Council, the Ministry of Health Advisory Council, and Consultative Council for Foreign Policy at Government of Malaysia, as well as a senior fellow of Adrian Arch Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. She is also the Pro-Chancellor of Heriot Ward University, Malaysia. She is a strong advocate for planetary health and sustainability, and she was the special advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia on public health and member of the Government of Malaysia Economic Action Council between April 2020 and September 2021. She is the recipient of numerous national and international awards, including the most prestigious Malaysian Merdeka Award in 2015 and ASEAN Prize in 2019 for her contribution to peace, community development, and humanitarian work. She also received the inaugural ISA Award for Humanity in 2013 from the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Gandhi King Ikeda Award for Community Development and Peace Building from Morehouse College, USA. Let's put our hand together to welcome Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud to stage to deliver this year's lecture titled Planetary Health or Accelerate Our Extinction. We have a choice. Welcome, Tan Sri.
Assalamualaikum, peace, good afternoon. Peng, thank you so much. You have been accompanying me on this journey and helping me with all the logistics and everything. Our distinguished guests, my beloved brother, Dato' Sri Anwar, someone I look up to. Dr. Uy, what a pleasure to meet you and all of you here today. I was just saying to myself, it's 2:30 in the afternoon on Sunday. Who will come? It's the best time to have a nap, actually. But I'm so happy that you're here. And I'm especially delighted and humbled and really honored to receive this award. I was just thinking to myself when I learned at lunch that the Hokkien word for woo is go. And my grandmother is a Go from Penang, so I wonder if we are actually related. So we need to go on ancestry.com and find out whether this is true. But today, allow me to take you on a journey through planetary health and introduce to you something I'm so passionate about. And I will tell you why I'm passionate about it. This beautiful lady is Rosita Mabuingo, and she's from Mozambique. When I was starting my humanitarian career in the late 90s, in 2000, the images of severe flooding in Mozambique, and when the Limpopo River overflowed and crocodiles were actually in the water, the image that really caught media attention globally was Rosita's mother hanging on to a tree, giving birth to her. And she was attached to the umbilical cord, and a South African helicopter came and rescued them from that tree. And I said to myself, as an obstetrician and gynecologist, how could a woman have to endure holding onto a tree, helping the baby deliver itself, not dropping it into a crocodile-infested water raging below, and survive? And it just tells you the tenacity, the love a mother has for a child, that when Mother Nature strikes back, the maternal instincts are even stronger. And that image lived with me for a very long time. And just before the pandemic, again, at the end of 2019, I was in Mozambique. And this is a picture taken there. Mozambique had been hit by another set of floods. And I met these beautiful children, and we talked and realized that one of the boys here also had a little sister who was born on a tree. Now, fast forward 20 years. What has happened to our civilization, our world, that we can't even provide safe places for women to have their babies? Why have we disregarded climate change, the impact of climate change? and how it affects every one of us. How could we be so blind? I asked myself these questions. I was very, very troubled. Floods are predictable, but when climate change hits you, you know they're going to get worse and worse. It's 2023, and we're still seeing it. Now, that got me into a very deep kind of state of figuring out what I wanted to do next, and at the same time exploring that perhaps we're not looking at health the right way. Perhaps public health is too narrow. Perhaps we're not seeing the bigger impacts of how we behave in the world and how it impacts everyone else. If we look back at history, this is probably the beginning of the Anthropocene, the era where human beings are actually impacting civilization. And we think that is when the first atomic bomb was tested in the deserts of New Mexico on July 16, 1945. We had the great acceleration. We have populations growing. We have, the GDP, the thirst for an increasing GDP. And we have, of course, desecration of our river sources. We needed more energy. We had more urbanization. People started moving to cities. We needed to grow more food, so we had more fertilizer consumption. We had to build large dams for electricity and other use. We had to use more water. So all this was to grow our socio-economic status, so to speak. But the impact on the Earth system was phenomenal. We saw, for example, rising carbon dioxide levels in the environment, nitrous oxide, which is very, very dangerous as well, methane, which is even worse than CO2. We see ocean acidification, we see less fish in the ocean, and all the other degradations that we have seen. So a group of scientists came together and said, what are the limits to which we as human beings can do so much damage to the planet? How do we create that safe space for humanity? And what can we scientifically measure so that we are guided by science? So Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Center and his friends from about 2008, 2009 decided to build this model and get those indicators and science to build the evidence. And this is what's called the planetary boundaries, which means that we have boundaries. In life, you have to have boundaries. You can't speed at 200 kilometers per hour on a highway. You have speed limits. So why can't we have limits as well in how we damage and how we use the planet? Now, for those of you who have Netflix, I highly recommend you watch this documentary called Breaking Boundaries, because Johan and David Attenborough actually talk about planetary boundaries and walk you through it. When the planetary boundaries were discovered and explained in 2009, only 3 boundaries were breached. When I started the center in August 2021, 4 boundaries were breached. Last year, around the middle of the year, 5 boundaries were breached. And by the end of last year, 6 boundaries have been breached. We are in trouble. We are slowly but surely killing the planet. And you will see that the boundaries consist of things that are actually very measurable. Climate change, freshwater change, and that's the most recent boundary that's been breached. And this is very dangerous because without fresh water, it's very hard to support life on Earth. We also have problems with land use, land system change, environmental degradation. We have also something called the biogeochemical flows. This is really the fertilizers and the chemicals we put into our plants, into agriculture, large-scale agriculture that seeps into our water systems. And then there's also novel entities, and this includes microplastics. 80% of people who were tested in the study had microplastics in their blood, including babies who were newborn, and they would have very quickly microplastics in their feces as well. So this is all manifest in different ways. For example, with climate change, we see global temperatures rising. You see the floods in Malaysia that are getting worse and worse, and still we're completely unprepared. We see glacial rises, glacial melts rising, and with that also the release of many viruses that are dormant under the ice. We also see large loss of wildlife and populations, and wildlife populations, and also monocrop growth that is actually destroying the populations as well, and diversity. We've been cutting down our rainforests. We have, microplastics that I mentioned, and of course the pH level of the ocean, so much so that it may not even be suitable for fish and other marine animals to live. Now, by 2050, it's estimated by 500 million will be subjected to water stress, which means that and if you look at conflicts, it's all also connected to climate change and planetary damage. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, Chad Basin conflicts, many of these places I've worked in, it is because of desertification. When there's not enough water, pastoralist communities have to move from place to place to look for water to feed their livestock. And when I go into these areas, you will see that they would rather feed their livestock than their children, because they say they can make more children, but they lose their livestock, they have nothing. So water is so crucial. And of course, highly polluted air causing a lot of damage, and I will share more with you later. So the Rockefeller Foundation came together with the Lancet Commission to say, what do we do now? We know that we've damaged the planet, that there are boundaries. How do we move forward in this next century? And what was said in the report was, we have mortgaged the health of future generations to realize economic and development gains in the present. Everything is thinking about short term. So in other words, humanity is driving itself to extinction. Unchecked climate change related impacts could cause 250,000 more deaths per year. I was shocked that in Johor, there were so many deaths this year due to the flooding. People who drowned, people, all the things that happened with flooding, right? By 2050, as I mentioned, 40% of the world's population could be under severe water stress. Biodiversity loss threatens humanity. And of course, soil degradation. If you keep putting fertilizer into the soil, you degrade the quality of the soil. We will lose about 1 to 2 million hectares of agricultural land per year. So everything is connected. Last year, the Human Development Report produced by the United Nations Development Plan, Development UNDP, produced what was, I think, one of the most interesting reports ever, the HDR report. What it said was, in the last 2 years, we have almost erased the gains of the last 5 years. And what it tells us is that all the different indicators that we measure for development, for example, our health indicators, poverty, gender equality, education, all fell for the first time. And this was in part due to the pandemic. But what is more clear, that there is a new uncertainty complex emerging. What it posits is that there is dangerous planetary change in this era of the Anthropocene, the era that we are living in now, where humanity is actually driving change and destruction. It also posits that the pursuit of sweeping societal transformations is causing a lot of uncertainty. We see this everywhere. You see this in Ukraine. You see this in, even in our communities. And then there's widespread intensifying polarization, which is not just global, also local and national and regional. So all these uncertainties create something called the new uncertainty complex. And on top of that, crises are no longer linear. So you have layers of crises that are colliding with each other. When we had COVID, we had floods. You have COVID, you have climate change, and you have a war. So all these things are happening. Syria, there's a conflict, there's an earthquake. So this complexity is made worse by colliding threats and colliding challenges that we face in the world today. So let me go back to health. When we ask people about health, most of you might envision a hospital, a doctor, a nurse, medicine, but actually 75% of our health determinants are environment, social, and behavioral. Only 20% is in the medical care complex. But how many of us, me included, who were trained in medicine, were actually taught about the environmental implications of health, or rather the implications of health on the environment? So all these things need to change, our understanding of health. And we know that without health, nothing happens. We've just experienced the worst of the pandemic, where economic, social, health, everything was impacted. So if we did a little research and we tried to model what kind of interventions might help. And what we found that just by focusing on environment, social behaviors in Malaysia, we could actually reduce the impact of health on our economy, but also for our people. You know, Penang, I mean, if I lived here, I would be extremely obese because everything tastes so good and it's so readily available, right? But the good thing is Penang, there's still a lot of places you can walk and exercise, right? Unless we improve our public transport, unless we actually create spaces for us to cycle or walk, you know, without dehydrating in the hot sun, I think that all these things are interlinked. So health requires us to look at transportation. Health requires us to look at clean air. Health requires us to look at nutrition and so forth, and behaviors, right? But climate change is real. In a study even done in Singapore recently, they asked the Singapore citizens, what is the biggest threat you see for Singaporeans? The number one answer was climate change. And I think if you go around Malaysia as well, people might realize that as well. But it's not just about extreme weather events. The exposure pathways in green include extreme weather events, heat, stress. We are actually heating up, but we're like frogs, right? Being boiled slowly because it's always hot in Malaysia. We think it's just hot. But actually the temperatures have risen in the last 10 years. Air quality is actually, I don't know if you realize that air quality is bad. I mean, driving into Penang, I was surprised by the haze that I saw across the bridge. And food security is a real issue, not just in terms of food security, but our whole food systems disruption, food waste. And of course, we look at variety and safety as well. Vector-borne diseases with rains, with the rise of dengue and so forth. Ecosystem habitats are destroyed. There's also displacement of people, as we've seen in floods also around the world. You know, loss of health promotion activities as well and protection as well. But these are associated with quite specific health risks, from lung diseases, respiratory problems, you get heat stress, you know, you get vector-borne diseases, there's more increase in hypertension, diabetes, non-communicable diseases, and so on and so forth. And of course, very important is mental health. So when we look at climate change impacts, the communities are impacted in so many ways. They lose their homes, they get damaged houses and property. The crop and livestock is damaged. Can you imagine now, Johor, I'm thinking about the pineapple plantations, the oil palm estates. You're looking at community breakdown because of crises like this. And of course, how do we then, look at forced migration, people being displaced, and how do we get changes and stresses to their livelihoods, the small businesses that have to depend on day-to-day businesses now being impacted. And of course, health systems are disrupted because hospitals can also get flooded and damaged as well. The mental health impacts are quite significant. We don't talk about it enough in Malaysia, but COVID exposed to us that Malaysians are just as deeply impacted by mental health issues. For many years, mental health is stigmatized in Malaysia. It's as though, your faith is not strong if you're depressed or you have mental health issues, whereas mental health issues are organic medical issues. But what we've discovered now, in the many surveys done around the world, young people have very serious eco-anxiety. They're very worried about climate change. They're worried about the future. Many of them choosing not to have children in the future. And we have an aging population in Malaysia that's going to struggle, especially after leaving so little in their EPF. So these are things that we all have to be facing with, and young people today who will be inheriting all these problems that we have created will be the ones having to deal with them. Let me talk a little bit about air pollution. Many people don't realize that about 9 million deaths will happen due to air pollution. And it is, as you can see from the map, different parts of the world are impacted. China and India are terribly, severely impacted by air pollution right now. So much so that in India, sometimes they have to shut the schools. Because imagine if the air quality is bad outside, how bad it is indoors. So this is going to impact young people as well. It's going to cause a lot of problems, asthma, rise in inflammatory diseases. There's a rise in asthma globally. And there's also, chronic obstructive lung disease, and of course, lung cancer, eye irritation. Cardiovascular diseases are also associated with pollution, and of course, impact on your reproductive system, infertility will rise, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it is about people. So let me tell you the story of this little girl. Her name is Ella. She died 10 years ago. She lived in Lewisham, just outside London, and they live quite near a roundabout, the South Circular roundabout, which is quite heavy in terms of traffic. So Ella's asthma became worse and worse and worse, and she was admitted to the intensive care unit, in and out, and finally she died. Her mother, Rosamond, who we're actually going to meet next month in London, she fought very, very hard because she said Ella's death is not because of asthma. Ella's death is because of toxic air pollution. She took the case to court. The coroner supported her appeal that Ella's death certificate will state death due to toxic air pollution. Rosamond has been lobbying the UK government for many, many years. The UK introduced a low emission zone and an ultra low emission zone, which has reduced the severity of pollution in London. And she's now, trying to push for Ella's bill, which is about the right to clean air. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister is not supportive. It passed through the House of Lords and now it's being debated in the House of Commons. But Ella could have been any one of our relatives. And Ella could have been a daughter, a niece, a granddaughter. But there are many Ellas in the world, and there are many Ellas in Malaysia. It's just that we don't know the stories, and we don't dig deep enough to look at why some children die from asthma. The other issue, of course, is food insecurity. It affects about 30% of the global population. And in Malaysia itself, studies have been shown, this is a study in 2016, 25% of our population faces insufficient food quantity and variety, and also quality. And the food security gap will reach 40% over the next 40 years. And now this is something we need to pay attention to, because climate change doesn't just destroy the environment and degrade the soil, but also the crops that grow become less nutritious because of the impact of climate change. So in other words, you get calories, but you may not get the nutrition, and that will have a long-term impact on cognitive function of children, so their intelligence and so on and so forth. So if we transform food systems to support the health of people on the planet, we can prevent about 20% or up to 10 million deaths per year, reduce our global greenhouse and gas emissions by about 38%. So these are, data points that tell us that how closely, climate change, our environment health is actually impacting our human health as well. This is what I think Dr. Sri Anwar and I get really upset about. It is about food waste. In Malaysia, I think the data is very similar. About 30 to 40% of the food that is going to the landfill 30 to 40% of food goes to the landfill, out of which about 40% is still edible. And if you actually rescue the food from the landfill, you can feed 12 million Malaysians 3 meals a day. Now, this is horrific, let alone the amount of methane that's produced. It just doesn't sit there, but the food degrades and releases methane, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gas emissions, even much worse than CO2. And $200 billion is wasted on production and delivery of food sent to landfills. So you need to transform that system of the food systems, because it has to be one that is about, number one, educating people not to buy more than they need. So I always say, take a shelfie before you go out, right? Take a photo of your shelves and stop buying too much. The second thing is food that is expired for a day or two something you throw? Maybe it's still edible. And they're fantastic organizations. One I'm associated with is the Lost Food Project, where it's working with supermarkets, with Pasar Borong, to rescue this food so that they can be repackaged and sent out to B40 groups so that they get good quality nutritious food. But we have a terribly quite a bad food systems in Malaysia that is causing this insufficient food, but also a lot of wastage of food. I think that needs to be rectified. It's not just about giving them menu rahmah or something like that. It's important, but we need to really relook at our food systems. And the less food that goes to the landfills, less fossil fuels will be used to drive those trucks going to the landfills as well. So again, it's all connected. This worries us, but not many people talk about it. And that is antimicrobial resistance. For us to receive chickens and all sorts of things that we're eating, for the chickens to be healthy, many of poultry farmers, particularly the big lock feeds and so forth, will feed the animals with antibiotics. The antibiotics get into their blood, but also seeps into the water systems, into the rivers. So basically, we may be consuming antibiotics without realizing it. And when we fall ill, there will be a time when the antibiotics will no longer work for us. And antimicrobial resistant or drug resistant bacteria is something that many doctors will be worrying about now. And it is estimated that there will be up to about 10 million deaths from antimicrobial resistance every year by 2050. And you will see that Asia is the most impacted because we are chicken and poultry eaters. So, ayam kampung, choose where you get your meat, and so on and so forth, and try to go away from a meat diet. But it's not just about getting sick. It's also about the impact on the GDP, right? If you look at antimicrobial resistance, when people fall ill, they don't go to work, the total GDP loss estimated from antimicrobial resistance is about 100.2 trillion. And this is huge. Let's go back to our Anthropocene, our behaviors. Humans are only about 0.01% of all life, but we have destroyed 83% of wild mammals. And this was a very recent study, and it shows that, humans surprisingly tiny part in the whole story of things on the planet and how we have such disproportionate impact. So again, it's about human values. What do we value? How do we make decisions that not only impact us, but impact the planet and other people as well? So, this is where it gets fun. Let's dive into what humanity's impacts would look like on a world that has existed for 4.5 billion years. And this is our world, right? From the time of the Big Bang, we estimate it's about 4.5 billion years. And I'm going to take that 4.5 billion years and compress it into 1 year. So are you with me? So I'm going to walk you through 4.5 billion years in a year. And this is what it will show. So this is the beginning of our 4.5 billion years in a year, and it's February 25th. Life actually appeared on February 25th. Around March 28, photosynthesis happened. So plants started to grow. But it wasn't until September 17th that we started to see some biodiversity on the planet. When organisms started mixing their DNA and fungi made an appearance. And by November 20th, that was the month fish appeared. So you imagine that humanity started 4.5 billion years ago. And if that was January 1st, only in November you got fish. By November 24th, insects arrived on the scene, and as soon as some marine animals figured out how to grow some skin to tolerate dehydration, came the reptiles. And those reptiles came on December 2nd. On December 13th, we had mammals on land. And on the 18th December, birds. All around that same time, December was a very, very busy month for animals. What about dinosaurs? Where are they? Actually, they've been extinct since forever, no? Not really. Only 6 days ago, on December 25th, we take a 1 year span that they appeared. And hang on a minute, it's almost end of December. So where are humans now? December 31st at 11:24, we came into existence, about 36 minutes to midnight. So think about this. The industrialization began only 2 seconds ago, from humans' appearance on 11:24 to 11:59. Only 2 seconds in that 4.5 billion years. So in these 36 minutes of humanity's existence that I explained, where humanity is 0.01% of life that existed on Earth, and particularly in the last 2 seconds, and for that percentage, you have to do the math, we have done so much destruction. What can we learn from nature? A lot. And nature-based solutions are one of the most important ways moving forward. How do we look at concrete that mimics and recreates shoreline habitats? How do we learn from nature? Nature's teaching us every day. And this has been done in many parts of the world, where they're looking at how, oysters and mussels and fish are, creating different ecosystems. And then how do we look at water treatment systems that mimic estuaries and purifying clean water coming through and coming out of buildings through edible plants, fish and snails? How do you build monsoon-proof landscape? A master plan that mimics how native forests handle monsoon precipitation. I remember being involved with a really nice project in Vietnam when the Vietnamese Red Cross decided to replant mangrove around a 5,000 kilometer coastal shoreline, right? And you will remember that around the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, Vietnam was constantly hit by terrible cyclones, and you don't hear that so much now. So what they did was, working with communities, they replanted a lot of mangrove. And not only did it reduce the impact of the cyclones because there was a barrier, but actually the fish started to come back, the crabs, birds, and now it's become a major source of ecotourism and food systems for the villagers as well. So you can actually learn from nature, and nature always heals. Nature will bounce back and show us the way to live. Hydrogen energy, we can actually mimic common leaves to create hydrogen fuel from sunlight. And it has zero emissions and clean water as a product. How do we mimic humpback whales to improve aerodynamics to wind turbines? This is what scientists are doing now, all those wind turbines, all learning from nature. And how do we even build LED light bulbs? That was inspired by the fireflies, the microstructures that enable LED light bulbs to be more efficient and have higher light extraction. So nature-based solutions are going to be very, very important. I started by talking about planetary health, and now it's the time for me to bring you into why planetary health is important. I mentioned earlier about how we can't just keep talking about health in the way that we normally do. And a group of scientists came together and produced this seminal report in 2015 about how do we safeguard human health in the age of the Anthropocene. And what it did come to a conclusion was that the health of human civilization and the state of the natural systems on which it depends. This is planetary health. It's not one health, it's not just the health system that has to work well. It's about how you interact with the natural systems. In other words, it's the environment. It's an international and interdisciplinary field that focuses on characterizing and addressing the human health impacts on global environment change. So environment is a very significant factor in our health. It's solutions oriented. It focuses on tackling humanity's actions that affects the natural systems so that both people and planet can thrive. We can't just thrive without the planet thriving as well. And unless we actually start looking at the declining state of the planet, we cannot advance humanity's well-being. Every bit of development we do, if we ignore the planet, you have an impact like a severe climate event that pushes you 10 steps back in your development. And we've seen this. If you don't start investing in preventing pandemics, then it also pushes you 10 steps back. So in other words, if you look at the health discipline, you have public health, global health, One Health, and then there's planetary health. COVID, it didn't spring out of the blue, right? It is because of our degradation of the environment that has allowed animals to transmit viruses to other animals because they become closer in proximity, and then they are transmitting to human beings as well. And unless we address the environmental degradation and the habitats of wildlife, which is being disrupted, we will get more viruses. So you're right that, you know, infectious disease experts are going to be busy. In the humanitarian and in the health sector, we always said the pandemic is a matter of when and not if. The next pandemic is also a matter of when and not if, but it's going to come earlier than the 100-year cycles. In the past, it's been 100-year cycles. So we will get more and more infectious disease outbreaks, and we will have more pandemics coming. There is a disease that we call disease X that the WHO has described that's going to be much, much, much worse than COVID. COVID has an incubation period of only 2 weeks, SARS-CoV-2. Disease X is postulated to behave like the Nipah virus with an incubation period of 11 months, which means that you could have the virus in you and be walking around and traveling around the world for 11 months, transmitting a virus that you don't even know you have. And it leads to very severe encephalitis. So these are the things that, you know, a lot of scientists and a lot of infectious disease experts and epidemiologists are starting to look at. Singapore is already starting to prepare. I've been in a couple of meetings with the Singapore government to look at how do you look at preparation for disease X. So I think these are the things we need to be ahead of the curve of thinking through what next and what next, right? But until and unless you actually start looking at the entire planetary health perspective, that it's not just about finding the virus, it's also about making sure that the zoonotic leaks don't happen, right? The animals don't transmit to human beings. You protect the environment, let them stay where they are. Then this is not going to be, it's going to be futile. So again, deforestation and palm oil plantations, right? One of the theories of Ebola spread was that a lot of the oil palm plantations displaced a lot of the bats. And what happened is that they go there, they want to feed, so they have no other food in their normal habitat. They go to the oil palm and they take the fruit of the oil palm and they urine. And bats are funny animals, right? These bats, they carry a lot of viruses, but they're quite happy to be flying around and feeding. But the minute they're stressed, they shed their viruses. And then that's when it gets transmitted. And at the same time, you know, the big questions around, did palm oil expansion play a role in the Ebola crisis? Because the West African region is a growing oil palm industry. Malaysia is ground zero for the next malaria menace. And this is quite worrying because malaria traditionally was human-to-human transmission, but they have now found that there is a malaria virus that is transmitted through monkeys. I'm especially worried because my house has a lot of monkeys in that comes to disturb our grounds. But you know, this, and it may be also climate-sensitive malaria that we'll be having. So these are things that, you know, are already happening around us, right? Because and as as my son says, they were here first. We can get very angry with the monkeys, but if they have been displaced, then they have no choice but to look for food where we are. But the health sector itself is not innocent. The health sector, your hospitals, your clinics, whatever, pharmaceuticals, if it was a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter in the world, in the planet. So health is a highly carbon intensive business. So in other words, the health sector has to start looking at decarbonizing itself. It has to look at how health practices needs to be much more sustainable and not polluting. Look at COVID. All of us were wearing masks. All these are not going to degrade very fast, right? One thing I tell everyone is make sure when you dispose your mask, tear off the strings because they get caught in birds and things like that. But the disposable gloves, why aren't we outraged? Why aren't we telling glove manufacturers that we only want biodegradable masks and biodegradable gloves? Where is our voice? Because there are biodegradable gloves. When I ask them, they say, yes, we have, but a bit more expensive. But if we say we ban single-use or rather non-biodegradable gloves, then the manufacturers have no choice but to produce in mass quantities biodegradable stuff. So again, it's about governance, it's about politics, it's about policies, it's about leadership. So these are the things that we have to start worrying about. And what we are doing now is really trying to help the health industry rethink its role in the whole sort of global emissions. No good to say, oh yes, the health sector is so good and we are all taking care of people and making everybody happy. No, we are also polluters. So we need to do our job better. Doctors put a price tag on the annual health impacts of climate change. It's 822 billion a year. It's a large amount of money that could be put to good use to address poverty, to address all the other challenges that we have. And they're here. It's not something in the future. So just to share what we are doing now, what I'm doing is looking at 4 areas. Preventing the next pandemic. How do we engage? We are think and do tank, like you at Penang Institute, where we believe that, the thinking is very important, but the doing is also very important, right? So we look at, not just research and knowledge and education, but also how we influence policy. So we've managed to influence the 12 Malaysia plan to have planetary health language in it. We want to tackle the climate emergency, looking at it from different aspects. And creating healthy cities, which, I know you're very passionate about. We are actually piloting donut economics in Ipoh. And finally, we want to look at achievable, sustainable food systems. But central to everything for me is 3 things: good governance, communications, and education. So I think this is going to be very crucial. I wanted to share this photograph because it's of a student. So right now we are piloting Planetary Health and Community Service as a module, 7-week MPU module for the university. And from 2024, every student who enrolls in Sunway University will have to pass a 7-week module on planetary health and community service. We believe this is so important because it's about leadership development. It's about making sure that when they become leaders, whether they're policymakers or business people or educators or entrepreneurs or civil society or policymakers, they will realize that the decisions they make have an impact on the planet and an impact on humanity. When I spoke to some of these students, I was quite really reassured when they told me, we know that there's something called Sustainable Development Goals. We know that we want to achieve sustainability. We just didn't know that we are actually responsible. And this is what planetary health is about. It's about us. It's about the Anthropocene. No point just blaming the government or somebody else. It's us. The decisions we make to choose a government, the decisions we make to support a business, decisions we make to whether we consume a lot of meat or not, the decisions we make whether we use plastic, decisions we make whether we recycle, right? So I think this is the essence of planetary health. I showed this, at many meetings, including the EAC, and I said, here we are worried about COVID-19. Right? When we started, they said, wash your hands, wear a mask, keep a safe distance, everything will be fine. 2 years down the line, still not fine. But we didn't see, right? And of course, people like us were saying, there's a recession that will follow this. This is going to impact everyone. Climate change is looming behind, and biodiversity collapse will be the ultimate loss for everyone, and that's going to end the planet. My lecture posits that we are accelerating our own extinction, and that many, not just our own extinction, but also many other living creatures on this planet. And we have a choice. So let me propose some to you. The first thing I will say is a planetary health approach requires a shift from siloed approaches in solving our most pressing problems, be it locally, nationally, or globally, to a systems approach. But it must start from good values and us. At the end of the day, whether you're a politician, economist, teacher, you will use your own value systems to make these decisions. I think this is very important. But it does require political, social, economic, including health and environment sectors to work together. Health is not the purview of the Ministry of Health. And with all that's going on in social media around our health systems, we'll be doomed trying to solve our health issues depending on the health ministry alone. Secondly, planetary health posits that in order for humanity to thrive, we need to reset our relationship with the planet. This means we all need to rapidly learn to do nearly everything differently, such as how do we produce and consume food? How do we manufacture products? And how do we produce energy? How do we construct and live in our cities? How do we manage our natural landscapes and our resources? How do we coexist harmoniously and responsibly with social, artificial, and digital technology as well? We need to recalibrate the stories we tell ourselves about our place in the world, our relationship to nature, and what it means to live a good life. And this requires us to rethink how we measure growth and success, and whether an endless quest for GDP growth is really the right way. Science and policy must connect to the biggest question of all. If we are all facing an existential crisis, and we are, what can science and policy do to ensure that evidence and mitigation activities are communicable? Beyond journal articles or UNFCCC reports, laws, regulations, and into a dialogue which starts with the arduous but essential process of sorting out how to translate complex, difficult to grasp science into digestible, actionable pieces of information that anyone on the street will understand. That finds answers to the arguments rather than complicating them in forums where everyone is suddenly an expert and debate is endless and futile while we move ever closer to planetary health collapse. The important thing is we need to work out two things. Firstly, what new course that humanity must take to ensure our future is one where planet and people can thrive? And secondly, how do we communicate in ways that are meaningful to people living complex lives in this increasingly complicated planet, and ensure that equity is put right up front, that everyone has that right? I believe we need an education revolution. From primary, secondary, and tertiary, where young leaders are molded, understanding the complexity and uncertainty of the world they live in and will face, and they need to be familiar with that, and they need to understand how to collaborate. They need to understand how to communicate and how to think systematically. This is especially required in the education of health workers, and planetary health must be included in general and public health. It's already beginning to happen around the world, and in our university, definitely, we are really driving planetary health and sustainability as a foundation of all education. And we'll be introducing this into our health programs and our masters in public health. Not just the planetary health aspect, but also health diplomacy. How do you get the message across and how do you negotiate? And we need to equip our future health leaders with the right knowledge and skills to negotiate. In other words, leadership development is key. So I'm really happy that Dr. Anis is opening a leadership school, because this is really, really important. And last but not least, I believe in activism. We need activism, right? We need the power and voice of young people and those who hold public trust. I've said many things that many people are not happy with. And when people say, but why would you do that? I said, because I have a responsibility, right? When people say, but you're so trusted, people look up to you. That's even more reason why I have to raise my voice, even though it's not easy for people to hear, or even if it may make me unpopular. Right? As my boss used to say, you want to be popular, you sell ice cream, right? Don't do this work that you're doing, right? All of us in this room now know that we are facing an existential crisis, and we all have a role to play, and we all have a small role, even if it's within your family, even if it's in your community, your workplace. You need to share this, and we have no time to lose. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? Thank you very much.
Tan Sri, please remain on stage and we will take the Q&A session soon. Thank you so much for such an enriching, enlightening journey to bring us through planetary health. And many of us, including myself, feeling very motivated and felt that we must be part of the people who carry out necessary action to save our planet. So without further ado, we would like to proceed to our Q&A session. For our friends online, please post your question onto the chat box and we will address them accordingly. For the member on the floor, we encourage you to raise your hand to ask any question, any burning questions that you would like our guests of honor to address them. So we may not have enough time to address all the important, interesting queries, but we will try to accommodate.
Tan Sri, there's a question online, so I'm going to read on behalf. At this juncture, how much should local policymakers focus on adaptation versus mitigation?
That's a very good and important question. Just repeat, that's a really good and important question. I think it's both. I think in terms of climate change, we have to very quickly pivot to adaptation. I think mitigation is difficult. Some might say we miss the boat a little bit. Adaptation is going to be key because people have to live and get on with their lives. But there are some mitigation efforts that we can still go on, right? I mean, I think there's a lot we can learn. I speak on Malaysia's context. It's really hydrometeorological issues, right? It's flooding and so forth. A lot we can learn from the Netherlands, for example, which is the lower land. I mean, they're below sea level, right? But they've been able to live very well, and they're one of the world's largest producer of food, exporter of food. So I think adaptation is going to be key. But everything must start with a mindset, right? The understanding and knowledge that we are facing a crisis, and we ourselves need to modify how we make our decisions and our behaviors. Now, mitigation, there's some mitigation, obviously, that's very important, right? You can build seawalls and other things. I mean, we should already start to map out which are the parts of Malaysia. I actually have the maps, but which will be underwater, by 2050, and start looking at moving, because some of them may include large institutions, right? That you have to start moving to higher ground and so forth. So all our development planning will be that mitigation effort to make sure that we will prevent ourselves from getting into trouble. So the short answer is we need both. I think we need very acutely more adaptation to face the current challenges we have, but we also have we still have to continue doing some mitigation.
Yeah, Tan Sri. So actually, from your talk, you had mentioned about 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries are already breached.
Yeah.
Actually, from your experience over the past decades or so, how much effort do we actually need to put in to reverse those boundary being breached and then to restore them actually, because I think the issue that we have now is the balance between the economic development and also the investment, which the return of investment may actually be so uncertain that it takes such a long time.
When I was in secondary school, many years ago, that was the first time I heard about greenhouse gases. I don't know whether you are young,
Same.
but we're talking, when I left school in 76, I already heard about greenhouse gases. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about the ozone layer, right, in our stratosphere that is being damaged and so on and so forth. Our ozone layer has repaired, which shows that if we come together and we acknowledge the problem and start putting in efforts to mitigate further damage, you can reverse the damage to ozone layer. So our ozone layer, COP15 in Montreal recently, it was very welcome that our ozone layer has repaired, right, to a safer level now. COP15 again, when countries, businesses, civil society came together and said, we will commit to 30%, protecting 30% environment by 2030. That's a real commitment. So what I'm saying is that it's not that these planetary boundaries have been breached. If you just say, oh, it's breached, you can't do anything, we're in trouble. All 9 will be breached, right? But if we start now saying, okay, CO2 is breached, fresh water is breached, novel entities is going to be extremely hard because there's just so much plastic in the ocean. But if you start looking at emissions, reduction in emissions and so forth, you will probably see, a reduction in those breaches. We have to try, right? And I mean, take a country like China. It's always seen to be a major polluter and so forth. I mean, China has more electric vehicles than anyone now. It's in Asia. It's really moving to electrification. Many parts of the world also going to green energy and so forth.
Yes.
So I think we have to do something, right? We can't just accept that things are so bad.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah.
Since no one is asking, so me holding the mic, I can ask. So, Tan Sri, I would like to bring back to the point that you mentioned earlier, plastic gloves. I mean, the medical industry actually create a lot of single users.
Yeah.
That's also for safety reason. We understand that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that plastic gloves are so much cheaper than the biodegradable ones.
Yeah.
But I believe that the equation is missing, because they do not take into account the disposal costs of the material. Maybe would you like to?
Yeah, you're right. But also, the matter of fact, single use are always cheaper than biodegradable stuff. But it's also about market forces. If, for example, you say there's a policy that you don't use single use, you don't use non-biodegradable, then the market will demand more and the price will come down. It's all about supply and demand, right? So I'm not an economist. I'm sure you agree with me that it's about supply and demand. But, that's how the market can move the positive change. The other thing, of course, is in the regulations, the ESG regulations. For example, if banks say they will not fund polluting businesses, then you can have a reduction in these kind of practices. I think our Bursa and Bursa KL, Bank Negara, moving towards that, which is really good. So it's also financial institutions, right? Because at the end of the day, businesses have to find money from somewhere to grow their business. So that is going to be the important policy changes as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for a wonderful lecture. As good as I expected, really, and better. I just wonder about the humans and what we have done to the earth, and to such an extent that we can't even believe it ourselves. What about the population growth? I mean, there are just too many of us, right? And, can you say something?
Yeah. At the moment, the population is high. My personal view, number one, is that I don't believe in population control, that you can't just... I think that the more education you give to women and boys, you will actually have people making the right choices in how many children they want to have. And I do think that the population will plateau. If you look at many countries around the world, birth rates are actually declining. Right? Only certain parts of the world that birth rates are increasing, and those parts women don't have choices. At the end of the day, you have to give women choice. So it's not Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And I think that, it's not just look at population, you have to look at the whole bigger picture. It's about poverty, it's about education, right? And giving people choice. And until and unless we address the right for women to make those choices, but inevitably, I think it will plateau.
Yeah, I do agree with Tan Sri, because I think even I involved in the refugees' health, and nowadays they felt more empowered when we give them a choice, and they will really do their family planning better. And I think over the last week we received our advisor, Dr. Sri, Dr. Jia Cheng Hai, for the society, and he did mention that actually we have been thinking that Japan is one of the country that with the population shrinking very fast. In fact, in Europe, Italy is one of the other
Yes.
country that actually is shrinking very
That's
fast.
right.
We have another question from the floor.
Right. So, yeah, my name is Justine. My question is about, I guess you're in a position where you have the opportunity to talk to the highest levels of government. What, in your opinion, is changing that we could be excited about? You mentioned that addressing Anthropocene is everyone's responsibility,
Yeah.
but we live in a government where in all generations of government is always like the government knows best, right? So what's happening to create spaces for civil society and for us to throw everything we have at it
Okay.
when government continues to be heavily siloed for reasons that actually suit itself?
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, what room is there for people that want to contribute to do so aside from activism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm on Facebook Live, so I have to be very careful what I say. I think, look, let's be honest, we've had real challenges, right? We've had 4 prime ministers in 5 years? And, although I don't speak to all leaders, right, but I may have access to some. I think when I look at the current government, the fact that they have a Ministry of Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, which means the pennies have dropped. They know that if they don't address climate change, it's going to be an issue. That's a ministry I've engaged with a little bit more than other ministries. Now, I was at a meeting with the minister and young people, and young people raise very important questions. This is our future we're talking about, right? And one of the things the minister committed to is that he would listen. He would go into a listening exercise before he comes to develop the Climate Change Act. And he wants to get inputs from young people and the general public, before making any decisions. I think this is a good step forward. Now, in terms of civil society engagement, I think we have a robust civil society, and not just a robust civil society, a civil society that really cares. When you look at COVID, right, during the time of the pandemic, the Kita Jaga Kita, people really helping, people, strangers helping each other, right? How do we create the civic space for that kind of engagement? I think this is where, Penang Institute, you can play a big role, right? This could be a civic space that people come together and share. I think that, the younger leaders we have in this country, the better, because I think they are much more comfortable with engaging and all that. But it also comes down to the power of communications. I think if the leaders in government today don't realize the signals being sent by the voters, the 15.7 million voters in the last GE, then they should be worried, because there's a clear signal and a demand to be heard, to be counted. And I think that social media is going to be one of those ways where they will be heard through, right? So this is why I said activism is very important. But it's also activism and diplomacy. I believe in both. You can't just keep hammering a nail. You've also got to find a way to sit down and engage and find solutions together. So it's early days in this current government. So far, I think I'm fairly optimistic, looking at least from the environment and climate change angle. I think one of the things I'm hoping to do, and I can say from my work in Ipoh, is we are going to build a civic space, a civic square. I'm actually going to go and study the model in Birmingham, which is a very multi-ethnic community, to see how we can have that. We need to have those conversations, right, among us. It's about also I was talking about the uncertainty complex, the societal transformations and polarization. Now, these are the things we also need to address because they're an illness of society if you have a polarized society. So I think the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? We have to wait and see. I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that the government listens to what we're saying, but also, be that mirror for them, right? To reflect on what we might be happy with or what we're not happy with. But generally, I think it's more open to listening. But it's not just central government, right? I think I want to focus on one thing. It's local government. I think that you get change at local level faster than when you get it at federal level. Don't look for federal changes to drive results. It's actually at local level, and if you start doing things at local level and it proves to be helpful. For example, if Penang decides to aim for, green energy by 2050 or whatever, zero waste society or something. Not only will it improve the environment, improve health and all that, but it improves your economy, right? Which other state will not want to follow? So it's about driving change at the lowest level and filtering upwards, not just waiting for change at the top to filter downwards, because I think that is very slow.
The impact of global solution, local action. We have another question.
Hi, Tan Sri. My name is Celine. So, in regards of the recent flood events, so growing up, I feel like Malaysia is a very safe area. I mean, we are in a very strategic location, but we've started to feel all these climate change impacts. And I'm thinking a lot about how do we achieve disaster preparedness, response, and also being community resilient. So my question is, how can youth play a stronger role, better role when it comes to responding to this, and how can we be making sure that we can push for more, like overcoming more silos when it comes to public health and planetary health? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that, first of all, we're not the only country facing these challenges. It's a global phenomenon now. You would have seen the Pakistan floods were the worst in history, right? And led to the loss and damage fund at the COP27. And I think that what we need to acknowledge is that climate change is real, it's happening, we're going to be impacted. I think at the federal level, I think we need a lot more being done in terms of very much modernized, clearer policies and a lot of investment in not just adaptation but also mitigation. But at the local level, young people and so forth, I always tell young people, number one, be aware of of the different websites, and actually there's a lot. It's just that we have to look for it in Malaysia. Right, you can look at your Banjir info Banjir. You have to look at your meteorological website. So all everywhere, right? So info Banjir is quite useful. So you look at that, and then the early warning, right? So within your school, for example, we have. When I was in Malaysia, and they're still doing it, they run school preparedness programs, right? So they go to schools and they teach the schools how to be prepared for disasters and what to do. Simple things like everyone should have a grab bag. In the grab bag, you have your important documents, anything happens, you grab your bag. This is something which is really, really important, right? The other thing, of course, I tell young people is that every home must have a first aider. So, learn from your Penang Red Cross or Rotary or St. John's or whatever, get yourself trained in first aid, because you may be living with an elderly parent or grandmother or something. So you need to be able to know what to do. For example, it's flood, somebody falls, whatever. So equip yourself with knowledge, some skills and so forth. The other thing, of course, is community watchers. I think that we have to start. The main reasons why we have disasters, I always say disasters are not natural. Hazards are natural. Disasters are a relationship with vulnerability, and vulnerability also is not just about poverty. Of course, if you live in a what do you call it, a settlement that's on a hillside that's not very well built, your risk is higher of a landslide. But also if your drains are blocked in your neighborhood, then chances are you also will get flooding. So, in the past you have Rukun Tetangga and all that, right? So how do you create a community watch as well to look at the drains, warn each other, the drain in front of your house is blocked, you need to clear that because when the rains come, your water is going to overflow and all that. So it's about community coming together. I would urge that, there are many organizations that actually start to do community-based disaster risk management. I know Mercy does it. I know Malaysian Red Crescent does it. Suchi Foundation as well. So start getting involved with some of the civil society groups to start some training for you. Maybe Penang Institute also can organize little workshops, for young people. But I want to stress on climate change and mental health. We have found that a lot of our students are worried at Sunway. So we run something called climate courage workshops. And where, now we are training all our staff. You've done the training, TJ? Yeah. So our staff are all trained, are being trained now in climate courage, so that they will start training more people, and then they train the students as well. Because, it's about creating a space where young people can talk to us about their anxieties on climate change and being able to express themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question online. Yeah.
Yes, there's another question online. Have we learned our lesson on the importance of air quality, especially with the airborne pandemic? What are the most urgent things that Malaysia has to do to improve indoor and outdoor air quality?
I think we haven't learned it. I think that, if I may be very honest, WHO until today refuses to acknowledge that, airborne transmission of COVID. I don't understand why, but it took a very, very long time to even acknowledge it. I think that air quality, we should have air quality index available in every building. Measurement, I have in my office, I have a little device that beeps if the air quality is poor, but so far it's been very good. And I think that we should have warning systems when the air quality is bad. And I think we've learned from COVID that we can work from home. So when air quality is bad, but don't mind you, if air quality is bad outside, indoors is worse. We need to find safe spaces, right, where the air quality is improved. Now, I firmly believe that all schools, all offices need to have air purifiers that help us to clean the air. But ultimately, it's about, why do we have poor air quality? It's fossil fuel, it's our cars, our transport on the roads, right? If we have more efficient public transports, then we won't have more cars on the road, right? If we have better commuter services and so forth. So I think we're far, far away, and I'm very worried because post-COVID, our air quality is just, gone from quite good to terrible. You see more cars on the road. I don't know about Penang, but in Kuala Lumpur, it's horrific, right? The traffic jams and all that are so bad. And I think that, the work policies are going to be important, that, how many days you can come in and how many days you can work from home, so that you prevent too many people driving on the roads. Maybe we need to have, like London and other places where you have the ultra low emission zones. We start to maybe have zoning, right? Where there's large populations, you need to reduce, especially around schools and so forth. So I don't think we're there yet. And I think this is something that the health ministry cannot solve. It's right from the top, right? Your policies on, why do you make cars so affordable that everybody wants a car? Because you don't have transport, right? If you improve your public transport, like Singapore, then not everybody will have to have a car. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Tan Sri. Any more question on the floor? Oh, yeah.
Assalamualaikum. Very good afternoon. Thank you very much, Doctor, for coming in Penang. Yeah, of course, whenever I hear your name, I think about Mercy first. Yeah, but I see now that you're also with Sunway. So Sunway has got many components in their business: education, development. Yeah. But we have a situation where sometimes there's a clash, and it happened in Penang. Yeah. If I'm not wrong, Sunway has also a course in Masters in Sustainable Development.
Yes.
But maybe you're aware, but I need to say, we had a situation recently, it's been 10 years, there was a development proposed by Sunway. It's a hill land, yeah. They paid to change the status, and propose development on a hill land.
Okay, before you carry on, I'm only in the education group, so I know
Okay.
nothing about development group. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a business, so I don't get involved with that. Yeah.
But I hope that I believe you have linked. I mean, you do meet the chairman, yeah, Jeffrey, because you say education. It's important that we must educate what is important.
Yep.
So what has happened here? There's been a clash. That the development was put, the resident objected, he went to a tribunal, yeah, a very good detailed judgment was produced by none other than knowledgeable judge.
Yep.
Yeah. But Sunway decided to appeal. They won it, and the residents again appeal. But in the final court, federal court, he went to federal court, a lot of money was spent, 10 years, the people won. So I just
Good on the people.
Yes, I just would like to request
Yep.
that if you meet, please take this message that Sunway learn from this.
Yep.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
will convey the message.
Thank you
Thank
very
you very
much.
much, sir. Thank you very much. We have one last questions from the floor. One more. Okay. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri. This is my boss lady at Sunway Center Planetary Health. No. Yeah, this is So the work at SCPH and what we are doing, do you feel that other universities can learn from it, emulate it,
Yes,
or what
yes.
else can we do further?
Yeah, thank you, TJ. So the course that we're running, the MPU on planetary health and community service, our plan is to make everything open source, so that every university can take it, adapt it, and use it. We are also in discussion with, in fact, I'm meeting University of Malaya soon and other universities to say, how can we help you to bring, planetary health into your curriculum and so on and so forth, right? So yes, knowledge for me has to be shared. It cannot be, I'm not interested in. Oh, I'm on Facebook Live, but my ultimate goal is to make sure that this knowledge is disseminated and known by many people, and that we have a responsibility as a center to actually share it. So as I said, it's in piloting. Next year it becomes full on, so it's mandatory.
Wow.
Yeah, so then in fact, I've been talking to a couple of foundations in Singapore who might want us to help to change it into a multilingual digital course so that we can actually disseminate it around ASEAN. So, it's also, for those who are interested, there's a Planetary Health Alliance. Penang Institute can become a member of Planetary Health Alliance. It's just no payment required, but you learn, there's a lot of tools there, they share knowledge, research, and so forth. We want to work on that. And next year, we are organizing the Planetary Health Summit in Malaysia, first time in Asia. It's always been in Harvard. So we managed to bid and win it for next year. And we want to bring it to Asia and bring our Asian perspectives into this matter. So, I'll be sharing with all of you more details, and please, you're welcome to join the summit as well.
Thank you, Tan Sri, for sharing such a great news and made Malaysia proud again during the bid. We have one last question from the gentleman.
Thank you. May I add my personal congratulations to Tan Sri Jamila for a lifetime work as a doctor, humanitarian and activist.
Thank you.
Okay. Back to the subject of our planetary health. I'd like your view, Tan Sri, on the position and the place the pharmaceutical industry has in this. Pharmaceutical industry, as we know, is largely dominated from the West.
Yes.
It has come together to our rescue in this COVID pandemic in a marvelous way, but not without the creation of problems in itself, regards to the vaccine and the implementation and all that. Okay, that is one point. Back to the pharmaceutical industry, because of its dominance from the West, it has created a huge disparity in basic health care in almost every country in the world, between basic health care and the other extreme, the advanced health care, and which is really almost out of the reach of the average person. Okay. And the second point is the pharmaceutical industry, as I see it, is itself responsible for a lot of emissions. There's a lot of wastage in pharmaceutical drugs. And also allied to that is the medical device industry, isn't it? Just basically.
Yeah, that's a really important question. It comes back to my previous point about global health equity, right? We saw, and then one of the ugly things we saw during the pandemic was the inequity of health, right? When rich countries could hoard vaccines, and then poor countries didn't have access to any vaccines, and it's horrible, and it also shows the greed of the vaccine industry, that it was about profit making rather than looking at vaccines as a global public good. So you're absolutely right, and I think that this is something, unfortunately, is market driven, right? So that is the problem. Now, in terms of I want to share two things with you. One is that there was an independent panel for pandemic preparedness that was led by two people who are very dear to me. One is Helen Clark, who is the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and Sir Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former President of Liberia. And they led an independent panel and came up with some recommendations, actually called out this inequity and called out, the lack of vaccine access, and also WHO's role, or rather, lack of leadership in some areas. But they then asked for a look at, a global risk council to look at all the future risks that we have, so that we can actually not just be caught unprepared all the time. But the second thing is on the need for a pandemic treaty. Okay, so the second group is something I'm involved with. I'm on the panel for the Global Panel for Public Health Convention, led by Dame Barbara Stocking. So we are pushing now through WHO for accountability, monitoring, right, equity, and what we are saying is that when you develop a global pandemic treaty, the most important thing is the accountability and monitoring. So it's not about saying there are countries, I don't have to mention the name, but that probably had an outbreak but won't tell the world, right? So how do we hold them accountable to be able to inform early? Because the earlier you know about something, you do a genomic sequencing, you detect the virus, you can develop the vaccine early and so forth, right? So I think that is also very important. Now, one thing good though there's nothing good about the pandemic, but one good thing that came out of the pandemic was that when scientists come together, they can perform miracles, right? The vaccine was produced so quickly.
Yes.
But it's not because it was out of the blue. The mRNA platform was already there. They were actually building it for a flu vaccine. But the minute the pandemic hit, then they stopped all their work on flu and switched to a mRNA for the SARS, right? COVID. But I think that is something to be optimistic about, which means the science is out there, and if there's global collaboration, things work fast. Now, on your question on emissions, now this is something I sit on the board of a very, very large pharmaceutical in Switzerland, and we have a commitment to halve our emissions by 2027, and we're on track. So I think that the whole ESG agenda, again, because in Europe, the EU has come up with very, very strict guidelines on emissions for the pharmaceutical industry. So I think you will see a gradual, decline and responsibility. But the challenge with all global emissions in any industry is the scope 3 emissions. And that's 90% of our emissions. And that's your supply chain, your all the other things that actually are not in your direct control. So, we are still a long way from achieving, what we hope is going to be that balance. And I don't believe in net zero. I think net zero is a cop-out, because when you start saying net zero, then people who have money can just pay for, carbon offsetting and so forth, whereas, the ones who are not rich will be suffering, right? So I think that, we have to move towards a reduction in absolute, carbon, whether it's 50% reduction or something like that.
More realistic.
Yeah.
Much more realistic. Yeah. Thank you very much, Prof. Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmood. We would like to actually ask you to give a small concluding remark. to all the audience here and also to our friends online. What is the important message actually for all of us that, by the time at the end of this event, before the tea party, so, something that we must put on actions and really, we have to change our mindset and do something real. The real game starts.
Yeah. I think the first thing I will say is that it must begin with you, right? Ask yourselves today, what is valuable to me? And I think that COVID was that moment of reflection for many people, right? Even if you have money in the bank or whatever, you can't travel, you can't meet your loved ones, nothing mattered, right? Except that you wanted everyone to be healthy and to realize that your health is connected to many other things. It's to the environment, it's to politics, it's to good governance, it's to economics and everything else. And how equity is so important. Because remember we used to say no one is safe till everyone is safe. And no one is safe in this planet till the planet is safe. So I think that, that moment of reflection, I think has to come. The second thing I would say is that, I love this saying by Lao Tse. It says, if you tell me, I will forget. You show me, I may remember. If you involve me, I will understand. I've taken the time today with great honor to involve you in the work that I'm doing so that I hope you understand and that you will use whatever knowledge you have today and look on the internet and other places as well. Start with your family, start to do little things that will change, how your life is, and then start growing, your circle. As Stephen Covey says, you can have a circle of concern and a circle of influence. You can have a large circle of concern, but unless you exert your circle of influence, then nothing's going to change. And I think start local. Penang has done many firsts. You were the first to ban single-use plastic, right? You were first in so many things, right? Be the first in actually leading a planetary health kind of approach to trying to solve all your problems. And it requires everyone to work together. So it's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Prof. Tan Sri Dr. Jamila Mahmud. Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming towards the end of our event today. Now, we would like to invite Dr. Anwar Fazal for giving his closing remark before we end our event.
Thank you so much, Tan Sri. That was so inspirational. We can see that you have the passion not only about talking about things, but also show how things can be done. And the important message that you gave was actually you must be the change that you want to be, which Gandhi spoke about. And that little people in little places can actually together, working together, can change the world. And I think your message is very, very clear. We loved your passion, in answering and also giving solutions to it. I just like to end by just reading a poem that I think we should remember. And this is that we all breathe one air. Yeah? We all drink from one water. We rise from one ocean and we live under one sky. Never forget that we are one, and together we can make planetary health something that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sri Anwar. After this, all of us will be empowered to become part of the catalyst for change, for climate change action, as well as planetary health. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for everyone who attend physically and those who attend virtually for today's event on our 7th Dr. Lien-Teh Annual Public Lecture, as well as the 2nd award ceremony for the Dr. Lien-Teh Award for Leadership in Public Health. So now we would like to call today's event off, and then there is a tea party over the garden of Dr. Lien-Teh. Please get some food. The light refreshment is just outside. So here we are. Thank you very much for your attention and have a nice evening. Goodbye.